So, as it's the first in the class, the most important thing that I want to tell is patients will not come with diseases, they will come only with symptoms. Like in pathology or microbiology, you would have heard about so many diseases like bronchitis or asthma or tuberculosis, etc. But no patient is going to come and tell that they are having tuberculosis or they are having asthma, etc. It's our job to find, and how we can find that is based on history and clinical examination. Patients will only present with a set of certain symptoms, and based on that, we have to find out what patterns which these patients present with, and then we have to make the diagnosis. So, uh, clinical medicine is all about knowing what are the symptoms and how to evaluate those symptoms. That, but once you find what is the disease, you can always refer a book for treatment. But you have to know how to find the disease. That is my opinion regarding clinical medicine. So, as I was reading about respiratory system yesterday, I'm going to talk about respiratory system. You can ask the people who are taking the class next to continue with respiratory system. So without further ado, we'll talk about symptoms and history taking in respiratory system. So as I already said, patients will present only with symptoms. And so what are the common symptoms associated with the respiratory system is, first will be cough, next is sputum production, next is hemoptysis, next will be dyspnea, next will be chest pain. So what we are going to discuss about today is what are we going to do when a patient presents with these following symptoms? Like what are these symptoms and how are we going to evaluate these symptoms? That is what we are going to discuss today. So first will be about cough. So you have to know what is cough first. Cough is forceful expiration against an initially closed glottis. The word initially closed is more important because books usually will tell forceful expiration against the closed glottis. If the glottis is closed, it's not possible to expire air. So initially the glottis is closed. So why patients cough? To eliminate the airway from foreign bodies or sputum or mucus, which are impacted in the airway. So what happens in the mechanism of cough is initially the abdominal muscles and the respiratory muscles will contract against an initially closed glottis. So since the glottis is closed, the pressure builds up inside the larynx. And when the larynx suddenly opens up, when the vocal cord suddenly opens up, the air is released as a gush of, with a high flow of air is released from the glottis, and that will help in eliminating the air. And along with it, the foreign body or whatever mucus it was impacted on the airway will be released. So initially closed glottis is an important term. So there are certain types of cough that we need to know about. First will be dry cough. Next is productive cough. And these are all what I'm telling is these are all patients present clinically. I'm not just talking from theory from a book. These are what the things which we commonly see in clinical practice. It's just short cough, grassy cough, bovine cough, next is paroxysm. So just remember that secretions can come only from the airway and the lung parenchyma. So with any sputum production, it is something that is coming arising from outside the airway of the lung parenchyma. So pleural disorders can cause dry cough like pleural effusion or pneumothorax. Interstitial lung disease. Interstitium is the area which is present between the lung parenchyma and not the main parenchyma per se. And as I already said, productive cough it comes from the airway and the lung parenchyma. So yeah, you have your pneumonia, tuberculosis, etc. All parenchymal lung diseases will have productive cough. In short cough, they have mentioned that it arises from the upper respiratory tract. And what is upper respiratory tract? It is above the level of vocal cord. Below the level of vocal cord will be the lower respiratory tract. Next is brassy cough. Brass is a metal, so this cough will have a metallic sound associated with it. This comes when the trachea is compressed by some space occupying region. So brassy cough, there's a metallic sound associated with the cough that is due to compression of trachea by a space occupying region, which is commonly a malignancy. Next is bovine cough. While talking about cough, I mentioned that the air will be expired in a very forceful manner because of sudden opening of the glottis. But in bovine cough, the explosive nature will be absent. This is because for the explosive nature of the cough to come, the glottis should be initially closed. And when the glottis suddenly opens, the air is released as a gush in a forceful and in a fast manner. In bovine cough, usually in conditions associated with recurrent laryngeal nerve palsy. So these patients will usually have glottis which is normally slightly open, or the glottis, the vocal cords are slightly open or weak. So they won't be able to close properly, and hence you will not be able to get that forceful nature of cough. So for a normal cough, the glottis has to be closed. In bovine cough, because of recurrent laryngeal neuropathy, the glottis is not closed initially. So you are not able to get that initial pressure development inside the larynx. Lastly, paroxysmal cough. Paroxysmal is sudden attacks of cough that is classically seen in whooping cough due to pertussis. So when you are having a patient who is having intractable cough, you have to inquire whether the patient is having sputum production or not, and you have to check. You have to make him cough and check whether the cough is having an explosive nature, or if it's able to produce sputum, or if it's coming in a paroxysm, etc. An important thing is, if the patient is telling that he is getting cough only during the night time, that is nocturnal cough, they are associated with certain very important conditions. First will be left heart failure. This comes in a condition, a symptom known as paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea. So you can go and read about it. Why patients get nocturnal dyspnea in initial left heart failure. Other conditions include bronchial asthma, chronic bronchitis, GERD patients will have microaspiration, which will lead to laryngitis. So all these conditions are pretty important. They are not benign conditions. So they need to be treated. Last is you have to inquire about if the patient is taking any drugs. Drugs per se, medications like AC inhibitors. They are a very important cause of cough. Usually the cough will be dry because of bradykinin secretion. So when a patient comes with cough, you have to inquire about the nature, inquire about if there is any diurnal variation and if the patient is taking any drugs or not. So next we'll move on to sputum. Am I audible? Is the screen visible?
Yes, sir.
So next is sputum. You have to know what is sputum. Sputum consists of tracheobronchial secretions, saliva, any microorganisms if they are present, and cellular debris. So usually saliva will contain squamous cells, and tracheobronchial secretions will contain epithelial cells, that is columnar cells. Normally eosinophils will not be present, and if eosinophils are present, you have to think about allergic conditions like asthma, allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis, which is actually becoming an important disease along with mucormycosis nowadays. And rarely, in conditions with parasitic infections like Paragonymous westermani, Ascariasis, these patients will have eosinophils. But routinely, we don't look or do any sputum analysis to look for eosinophils. So, while describing about sputum, we have to ask about what is the amount of sputum that the patient is producing. If the patient is producing more than 100 ml per day, This is known as bronchoria. So bronchoria is associated with conditions like bronchiectasis, where there will be foul-smelling sputum production, lung abscess, empyema. Empyema is first collection in the pleural cavity and it can sometimes rupture into the bronchus, and lung carcinoma. In bronchiectasis and lung abscess, the patient may sometimes say that when there's a postural variation, when he turns to one side, the sputum production increases. So this is something which is an important place, which is usually emphasized. Postural variation leading to increased amount of sputum production is seen in bronchiectasis and abscess. Next is color. So in usually I have to inquire about the color of the sputum. First will be green, which is commonly seen green or yellow. So this indicates pus, and this indicates a bacterial infection. Why green in color? Because of the presence of the enzyme myeloperoxidase. Neutrophils will enter into the area of infection and they will produce enzyme myeloperoxidase, and this leads to greenish color of sputum. Next is pink frothy, very important, commonly seen in clinical practice, that is pulmonary edema. Next we have certain conditions which you need to know about. Rusty color, red currant jelly, then black. So rusty is seen in pneumococcal pneumonia. Red currant jelly is Klebsiella pneumonia. Black is coal workers pneumonia. One more terminology, known as Ancovisas. Whenever you hear the term, that indicates something to do with amoebic liver abscess. Since we are talking about RS, this means amoebic liver abscess which is ruptured into the lung. So we have to ask about the amount of sputum production and the color of sputum production. Next is the consistency. If it is just serous or watery, normally we will think that it is benign, but in RS, if the sputum is serous and large amount is produced, it indicates a high risk of bronchogenic carcinoma. If it is mucoid, indicates COPD, conditions like chronic bronchitis or asthma. Purulent is something which is actually treatable. This indicates infections, pneumonia, lung abscess, TB, etc. And last will be the smell or the odor. Foul smelling will be seen in infections. Infections means severe infections, like lung abscess and empyema. Empyema is accumulation of pus in the pleural cavity. And if it ruptures into the lung parenchyma, you will get sputum infection. Otherwise, if it remains as just a pleural disease, you will get only a dry cough. So this is about sputum production. We have seen what is sputum, and then we have to describe in terms of amount, color, consistency. And we also need to ask about postural variation associated with sputum production. Next is a very important emergency topic, that is hemostasis. Hemoptysis is expectoration of blood. Important term is the blood should come from the lower respiratory tract. That means below the level of vocal cord. Above the level of vocal cord, it's not hemoptysis. The main problem comes in uh, you will not be able to differentiate easily between hemoptysis and hematemesis, even though we read all the definition and stuff. Because if a patient is having hematemesis, which is vomiting out of blood, patient will aspirate some amount of blood, he'll also get cough, he'll also have cough again some amount of blood. So the patient may not be able to tell clearly if he's having hemoptysis or hematemesis. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to differentiate between hemoptysis and hematemesis. So it sounds so easy, clinically it may not be so. And we have also faced many situations where we are not able to differentiate whether it is hemoptysis or hematemesis. So hemoptysis is expectoration or coughing out of blood. Hematemesis is vomiting out blood. So this is from the respiratory tract. This is from the GE tract. So how to differentiate? You have to ask history whether cough is preceding the episode of bleeding. If cough precedes, it is hemoptysis. If nausea and vomiting is preceding, it is hematemesis. Next is color. Bright red and cyan blood you can see in hemoptysis. Hematemesis can also have bright red blood, but usually what is classically described as coffee colored blood. And usually we see patients with hematemesis not having bright red blood, usually it's coffee colored only. Coffee colored or black in color. This is because the acid present in the stomach will digest some amount of blood and convert it into acid hematine. So this is a very important clinical point. Next is, since hemoptysis is coming from the respiratory tract, it will be frothy, mixed with air initially. Hematemesis may not be so frothy. And as I already mentioned, hematemesis is associated with acid. So the pH will be acidic. So we normally don't send the vomit is for analyzing pH and all. pH will be acidic. This will be alkaline. And hematemesis, if it comes out through the lower GI tract, that is via the rectum and anal canal, it will be black and tarry in color. That is known as meline. So even though it comes out through the lower GI tract, it is actually blood from the upper GI tract that has been absorbed, that has come out via the small intestine through the large intestine to the rectum. So hematemesis patients, after 1 or 2 days, they will tell that they are passing black and tarry stools. That is known as melena. Since hemoptysis is coming from the respiratory tract, there will be no such association. So hemoptysis will not be associated with bleeding. So clinically, this is the easiest way to differentiate between hemoptysis and hematemesis, but nothing like actually seeing the patient vomit out directly. So we have to classify the severity of hemoptysis. Less than 100 ml will be mild, 100 to 150 ml is per day, 100 to 150 ml is moderate, less than 200 ml is severe, more than 500 ml per day, or 150 ml per episode with multiple episodes happening in a day. This is massive hemoptysis. Mild, moderate, severe, and massive. So massive means the patient will go into shock At least grade 1 shock. Grade 1 shock is minimum 500 to 700 ml of blood loss is happening. So, massive hemoptysis, the patient has to be resuscitated and definitely admitted. And these patients need aggressive intervention. You have to find out the source of blood and stop it either by bronchoscopy or surgery. An important point is lung has dual blood supply from both the pulmonary circulation and the systemic circulation, which is the bronchial artery. Hemoptysis is almost always associated with systemic circulation, that is bleeding from the bronchial artery. Why this is because the systemic circulation is the one which is a high pressure system, and hence bleeding will usually come from only a high pressure system. Pulmonary circulation is a low pressure system. So pulmonary is low pressure and systemic is high pressure. So if someone asks you like from hemoptysis from which vessel, it's usually systemic, and that is why you're able to intervene also. Pulmonary circulation is not so amenable to EP intervention, but systemic circulation, you can do angiography, you can do bronchoscopy and identify the source of bleed and embolize that particular vessel. Procedures like bronchial artery embolization are done commonly nowadays, and because it's a systemic circulation, it's easier to access also. But there is one condition where hemoptysis is associated with pulmonary circulation, that is known as Rasmussen's aneurysm, in which the bleeding is coming from the pulmonary circulation. You see in tuberculosis. So, few more terminologies with respect to hemoptysis. There is something known as spurious. Spurious is blood that is coming from the upper respiratory tract, that is above the level of vocal cord. You won't be able to differentiate. But I said true hemoptysis is one that is coming from below the level of vocal cord. So this is spurious hemoptysis coming from upper respiratory tract. Next is pseudohemoptysis. A common question asked in entrance exams in the past. This is not true hemoptysis. This is just the color of the sputum being red in color due to the infection Serratia marcescens. Because of the presence of pigment known as prodigiosis. There is something known as endemic hemoptysis, that is lung fluke infection. Paragonum system. As we said, all parasitic infections will be associated with eosinophil production. So in the peripheral blood, you can see large amount of eosinophil. So a few causes of hemoptysis we will discuss before going on to the next topic, that is dyspnea. First is infection. Common infections and tuberculosis. This is the most common cause in India. The most common cause of hemoptysis overall in India. Then we have lung abscess. Then we have bronchitis. Next is malignancy. So if the patient comes to you with hemoptysis, these are the two most important causes that you have to think about. Malignancy is bronchogenic carcinoma. Rarely any metastasis to the lung. If you have ruled out these two, then another important cause comes, that is from the cardiovascular system. Any mitral stenosis or pulmonary hypertension can cause rarely, but an important cause will be aortic aneurysm and arteriovenous malformations. why I'm telling all this is patients will come to you only with symptoms. When they come with symptoms, you have to take history and then try to identify whether this patient is likely to have an infection or a malignancy. Because infection means they'll usually have associated features like fever, etc. Cardiovascular means they'll have breathlessness, chest pain, etc. Like that. Based on that, you have to identify what pattern to which the patient is getting into, and then try to find out the cause. So you have to know the causes. You have to know the causes of the symptoms for which the patient is presenting. Then other causes are quite rare. You have to rule out these most important causes first, and then only think of these causes, like collagen vascular disorders like vaginous granulomatosis, bleeding disorders, etc. So this is about hemophages. As I already said, initial most important point is you have to find out whether it is truly in hemophages or it is hematemesis or not. That is the most important thing. Then you have to quantify the amount of bleed, whether it is mild, moderate, or severe, and then you have to think about the causes. And simultaneously, you have to resuscitate the patient. You have to do IV fluids. You have to give blood transfusion. Etc. Next will be breathlessness, that is known as dyspnea. There's a horrendous definition given in Harrison. If you're interested, you can go and see. I won't tell that. Simpler term is unpleasant awareness of one's own breathing. So with respect to dyspnea, the most important thing you have to know is you have to identify how severe it is. So for that we are having grades of dyspnea. And that grading is known as Modified Medical Research Council grading. It is very, very important, used in UG level, PG level, or any other level, whatever level you can think of. You have to grade the dyspnea because that is the one which will help in deciding whether the patient needs immediate intervention or admissions or not. So we have four grades, actually five grades. Grade 0 is normal phenomenon. So what is grade 0? Breathlessness with patient is becoming dyspneic or breathlessness with strenuous exercise. So which is quite normal. Grade 1 is patient is becoming breathless while hurrying along the level ground or grade 2 is patient walks slower than people of the same age group. Or he has to stop for taking breaths many times. While walking along a level. So clearly it's not normal. He has to stop or he's walking slower than people of the same age group and he has to stop many times to take breaths in between as he's becoming breathless. So grade 3 is simple. Patient has to stop after walking for about 100 yards. Grade 4 is dyspnea at rest. Unable to do household or daily activities. Patient cannot even bath on his own without becoming breathless. Patient cannot change his own clothes without becoming breathless. So very important, whenever a patient comes to you with breathlessness, you have to grade it. Grade 0 probably they won't come to the hospital itself. Grade 1 is the patient becomes breathless while hurrying along the level ground or walking at a slight speed. Grade 2, the patient is walking slower than that of normal people or stops many times while walking along the level ground. Grade 3, the patient becomes dyspneic after walking 100 yards. And grade 4 is patient is breathless at rest. With regards to mechanism of dyspnea, I just tell the names of the receptors alone. So we have stretched receptors on the chest wall. We have chemoreceptors which respond to changes in arterial oxygenation, that is PO2, PCO2, and pH. These are present in the carotid sinus and aortic. So stretch receptors will change any changes in the chest wall expansion. Chemoreceptors will detect any changes in PO2, PCO2, and based on that they will increase or decrease the respiratory rate. And then we have J receptors. They are present in the interstitium, that is the alveolar capillary junction. And if any fluid accumulates there due to pulmonary edema or any infection, they will be stimulated and they will increase the respiratory rate. So the important thing is, if the patient is coming to you with breathlessness within minutes, sudden onset of breathlessness, you have to think of the acute causes. That is, the causes which need to be addressed immediately, otherwise will lead to fatality. That is pneumothorax, pulmonary edema, pulmonary embolism, ARDS. So these are causes of acute breathlessness. Slowly developing breathlessness, foreign body is also an acute cause of breathlessness. Slowly developing, you will get in pneumonia, you will get in left heart failure. Most important conditions will be interstitial lung disease and COPD. So acute breathlessness is something which has to be correctly limited or the patient will die. Simple as. So this is about dyspnea. There's another scoring system for cardiovascular diseases, that is also MMRC or NIHA classification. It's more or less similar to this, but the main criteria is the patient should have a cardiovascular disease. That has four stages and 4 grades once again. One is no limitation of physical activity. 2 is light limitation of physical activity. 3 will be marked limitation of physical activity, and 4 will be reflexive activity. But the patient should have some cardiovascular disease associated with it. So that is someone will explain to you when they are talking about cardiovascular disease. The last clinical sign associated with respiratory system is chest pain. Most important thing that you have to do is you have to differentiate it from chest pain due to cardiovascular causes. Chest pain in respiratory system is usually thoracic. That means the pain will be short stabbing pain, increased on deep inspiration, and relieved by breathing shallow. That is, the patient doesn't breathe to the deep levels, or by lying on the affected side. In contrast to that, the cardiac pain, which is the most important thing that you have to note when a patient comes with chest pain, will be retrosternal, not affected by respiration. There will be radiation of the pain to either the right arm or the left arm, to the jaws, to the shoulder, etc. If it is a stable angina, it will be relieved by rest or nitrates. If it is unstable angina or myocardial infarction, they won't be relieved by rest or nitrates. So that is cardiac pain. So this is the most important thing that we need to know about. When a patient comes to you with chest pain, you have to rule out cardiac always. So associated history that we'll ask is whether the patient is having fever or not. To find out that the patient is having any infection. You have to ask for loss of weight, loss of appetite to rule out malignancy. So that's it about today's class. If you have any doubts, you can ask me. Thank you. I will send you the notes.
Sir,